Okay, would you rise, please? And we'll ask God to inspire this Bible study. Eternal God in heaven, our Heavenly Father, the God who has made us, male and female, and husbands and wives, we're very thankful to you, God, for your plan of marriage, for showing us its beauty, for showing us its importance. Do inspire me tonight as I speak to your people, and do inspire them as they listen and hear, and help them to heed, to take note of the beautiful example that you have left beginning many thousands of years ago, and you've let it be recorded for us to share tonight. Please inspire this, God, and we ask it in Jesus Christ's name. Amen. I'm very glad that you did sacrifice your time to come out, although I would like to see twice as many people here who aren't. And it's usually the people that show up, they usually need it the least. And the people that stay away are the ones sometimes who need it the most. Life is funny that way. Thank you, sir. I have, for the last, as you know, since the spring, been talking about, love and marriage and the family. We've gone through the expense of buying the films or renting them. And I have put in a lot of time on this subject because I feel it's very important, because if our families aren't sound, then our church certainly isn't going to be sound. And over the last few days, I have put a lot of study and time into the Song of Solomon. And I have to say, after probably about 12 hours of intense study of this book over the last 2 or 3 days, that it is one of the most beautiful books of the Bible. I did not know that it was as beautiful as it is until I really got into it. I even went out back or across the lot there. I have a friend, a neighbor, who is a rabbi and has been a rabbi since 1932. I even talked to him and got some books as far as the Orthodox view of that book, and it's a very inspiring book. Sex, I'm going to make a statement. Sex is holy. You may have looked at it in the past as being something physical, but I'm going to tell you it's downright holy. In fact, it is sacred. And I have learned this year more about of how sacred it is any time in my entire life or ministry in the church. Not that I worship sex, but sex should be used to worship God. Now that might sound like an astounding statement in itself, but it's true. Because God blessed it, and God thinks it's very holy, very enjoyable as well. As the French say, vive la différence. My French is bad, but maybe Joan could comment on it and say it better than me. But, thank God for the difference, because He made it. And some of the things that we're going to talk about tonight are going to be maybe a little embarrassing to some of you, but it shouldn't be. And perhaps the reason it is because, as I look at it, this society and Satan's done a number on your mind, because God did not intend it to be embarrassing in the proper setting, which this is amongst adults. That's why I didn't want children here. Although if you have teenagers over 18, I have no problem with that. But some of the things will be very blunt, but it's going to be beautiful, because that's the way God meant it. And God inspired the book of Song of Solomon, or the Song of Songs, and He inspired it in a very beautiful setting, because that's the way sex should be. It should not be brought down to the ground by premarital sex or sex in a perverted way or out of marriage, but in marriage it's the most beautiful thing. I made the statement that I feel that it is holy, and I really do. In fact, when you look at Deuteronomy 6:5, it says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all of your mind, with all of your soul." And when we get to going through the Song of Solomon around verse 6 of chapter 7, it uses the same word to talk about the love between Solomon and his bride. And that Hebrew word is A-H-A-V-A-H. And it simply means to love with affection. And the way we love God is directly related to how we should love our mate. It should be the same fervency. In fact, in talking to the rabbi, and I've got a Jewish friend who is in the ministry and graduated from Ambassador College when I was on the refresher program, we discussed it. And he said that in Israel and amongst certain sects of the Jews, that the worship of God and the intensity with which two married people love one another are directly related. And certainly seeing how that God didn't change the term and the word in the Hebrew of how we should love Him as to how we should love our mates is certainly indicative of that. In ancient times, even pagan peoples had a part of the worship of their gods, sex as a part of it. And this is a perversion of the way God intended for husband and wives to love one another. Evidence there in Corinth. I don't know if I want to take the time. Maybe I will. I'll just comment on it. But in 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 15, Paul talks about how one, through sexual intercourse, lays with a harlot. He becomes one with that harlot. He said that because in the city of Corinth, they had these temples. Temple to Diana, temple to Athena, and all of these temples. And part of the worship and the responsibility of the males of the society and the worship of their gods was to go in and have intercourse with these temple prostitutes. This was like worshiping their god. Well, in the same sense, they have perverted what God said is beautiful and sacred and holy to be between husbands and wife. Not prostitutes and going with anybody, but just you two. So I just want to show you how that these things have been perverted in the past. Now let's get to the Song of Solomon. I'm going to sit down. I wish I had a lectern here because I feel more comfortable and my mind is more stimulated when I can do all these kinds of things. I don't know. I guess they do say coordination is directly related to the mind, and maybe that's so. I'm very uncoordinated, so I don't know how good my mind is, but I think better on my feet and when I'm waving my hands, so I'll try it sitting down. And I think you can all see me still as I'm seated. Let's look at some principles, first of all, in understanding the Song of Songs, because, as I said, the people in 1611, when they went to the original Hebrew text, looked at it, they were a little bashful themselves, and they began to blush, and they let their values influence the way that they translated into the English the original Hebrew. So I'll say this, first of all. Let's call, instead of calling the Song of Song or the Song of Solomon, let's call it a song for lovers, because that's exactly what it is. Let's just entitle this book, The Song for Lovers. I don't know how much we will cover tonight. There's an awful lot here. And I don't want to rush through this because, as I've told you, you shouldn't hurry love anyway. And I'll just say, in your sexual relationship, you ought not to hurry it. You ought to take time, like savoring a fine wine. You know, you just don't take, a bottle of $1,000 bottle of wine and just, turn it up, look, and it's gone. You don't do that. You sip it. You savor the aroma and you enjoy it. And love ought to be that way in marriage too. So I'll just make that point. I'll talk about it later because God does. But let's call it a song for lovers. And we'll take our time going through it. It may take me 2 more Bible studies to get through this. This book is about love. It is about romance. It is about sex. It is about premarital state, and it is about the marriage state. It is about the excitement of romance and love. It's about the beauty of sex and marriage. It's even about marital problems. I discovered as I went through this that there are marital problems that are revealed here, and the solution to them are very inspiring, the way they solve them. There are 3 figures, principally, in this book. Solomon and his Shulamite bride. And believe it or not, there's a 3rd figure who even gets into their sex life and comments on it as they're making love. And that is God. So the 3 figures are Solomon, the Shulamite bride, and God, who gets into their marriage and even to their sex life and comments and makes recommendations even as they're making love. Solomon's name in the Hebrew is actually spelled S-H-O-L-O-M. And we know what the Hebrew term for peace is. It's shalom. And Solomon's name means peace. And just like we have the feminine version of a name, we have a masculine version of a name, counterparts, such as maybe a father names his daughter, the father's name is Don, he names his daughter Donna. Someone please turn that fan off me. I'm going to be sick. For some reason, I feel a chill. I'm like as they say down south, like a baby turkey. You got to be very careful with them. They get sick real quick, and that's just like I am myself here. But anyway, His bride's name is, you have Don and Donna. His bride's name also means peace. Shulamith, the name Shulamith, is the feminine of Solomon. And it's very interesting that the purpose of marriage is to be one physically, sexually. When God said that they should leave mother and father, cleave to one another, and they two shall be one flesh, He speaks, first of all, sexually, physically, but that also includes a mental phasing into one another as well as a spiritual. And they were one, even having similar names. Now, let's look at 3 principles for understanding what we're going to read, because it is shrouded in metaphor and allegory. First of all, realize that many Bible scholars try to spiritualize away the book of the Song of Songs. They try to say, well, it's directly a type of Christ in Israel or Christ in the church. It is that, yes, but primarily it is a book about love, marriage, and sex. It is first of all to physical human beings. It is primarily a manual for husbands and wives. It's a song and it's instructions for lovers. Secondly, realize that older translations like the King James versions and others try to hide the meaning. That's why we're going to use the New American Standard Bible. Moffat is pretty good in this way as well. They do a better job in bringing out the true meaning. Thirdly, the book was inspired in the romantic language of that day. Like today, we'll say in romantic terms, boy, she really turns me on. Now, 3,000 years ago, if you would have spoke to Solomon and the people of his court and says, man, she really turns me on, they wouldn't know what you were talking about, because you're speaking in the metaphorical romantic language of our day. They spoke also in a figure of speech of their day. So the book is inspired in the romantic language, the metaphors, the figures of speech of their day. And it overflows with poetic imagery. Remember that. The figures of speech. And these figures of speech are used to capture the emotional feelings of the two people involved. Mere words cannot really express the love that was between Solomon and his bride. They had to use other figures of imagery to really get the impact of how they felt towards one another across. So the emotional association to the metaphor is the key to understanding its meaning. So now let's look at what I feel is one of the most beautiful books in the Bible. Let's start in chapter 1 here. First, the story starts out describing the character of the king. This is the bride, the Shulamith girl, in soliloquy. That is, she is thinking in her mind. We would say today she is fantasizing. Remember I told you one of the keys to help you grow in love with your mate is to think about the positive aspects of that mate. Picture that mate in romantically pleasing situations, and how that imagery and that imagination will have the impact of helping you to grow more fonder of your mate. You thought I was coming from left field, but hey, here we have it here. She's sitting there thinking about how beautiful and how lovely and how great. And he starts off talking about his character, fantasizing about her husband to be. And this, of course, as I said, produces feelings of love. She says, oh, that he would kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. Now, that's not spiritualized that away, and that's just Christ's relationship with the church. No. That is talking about the relationship between a man and a woman. Just very physical. Get all these spiritualized allegories out of your mind and just think like it is, okay? You have to do that. Now, they're not married yet. They're not married. They're engaged. And she's thinking, oh, that he would kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. She's looking forward to the time when they will be married, when he will be able to kiss her. This is the way she is thinking. For better than wine is your affection. And again, I said, love ought to be treated like a fine wine. It's not to be gulped like Ripple. It just isn't. It's supposed to be savored and appreciated. For your fragrance, your perfumes are pleasing. Now, and perfume poured forth is your name. Throughout the Bible, it talks about how a person's name is symbolic of their character. And she says, your character is so great and so outstanding, it is like perfume that is poured out, that is fragrancing a whole room. So she not only looked at him physically, she also looked at his character. And we ought to do that with our mates. We ought to look at the character that stands behind them, even as she fantasized about him, the refreshing character as perfume. Therefore the maidens love you. Not only was he well thought of by her, but all the maidens of the palace also thought that he was a great man and loved him. And she says, as she's thinking in her mind, she's not saying this out loud, this is just in her mind, draw me after you. I want to follow you. Let us run together. Here, she supports her man's leadership. She accepts and she encourages her leader. She's not like one of these flaming ERA devils, wanting the man to follow her. She realizes the beauty of that, and she says, draw me after you. I want to follow you. Let us run together as a team, but you leading. So here already, before the marriage, in her mind, she thinks positively about her role as a wife to him, to be led by him. And she accepts it and encourages his leadership. The king has brought me to his chambers. Now, he took lead to initiate that relationship. And we'll talk about that at the end of the book, how they met and how they came to know one another. But he took the lead. He was the aggressor in the relationship. He initiated it. Now, the daughters of Jerusalem. These are the maidens of the palace. The daughters of Jerusalem now speak aloud to the king. We will rejoice and be glad in you. We will extol your love better than wine. Everyone thought he was a fine person. It just wasn't her fantasizing about it. It was true, because he had the recognition of everybody in the court. Even the maidens thought that he was a great guy, as I said before. Rightly, now the bride thinks again, as it says in soliloquy here. The bride thinks again in her mind, rightly do they love him. After they speak that, she sits back and says, yes. He really is a great man. Now, how many of you ladies really think about your husbands that way? Do you think while you're over the dishes and you're washing them and drying them, is your mind on your husband and you're thinking about how great he is? And when other people praise him, do you say, that's right, he is a fine fellow? I really feel that the mind is the key to our actions. And the way you think about your mate, not only the husbands to the wives, or the wives to the husband, but vice versa, it's very important as to how you're going to view him. Or do you cut him down in your mind? And we can all find something negative about one another, and I'm sure she could about Solomon. She could have said, man, you drank too much. And when we read Ecclesiastes, we see he had problems. But she's not concentrating on his problems. She's concentrating on the good things that was in his character. Now in verse 5, and I'm going to take you into different sections, and I'm going to show you who's speaking in the different parts. Now we see the character of the Shulamite bride. And the bride speaks aloud now to the daughters of Jerusalem, the daughters of the court. She says, we're talking about the daughter of the bride, right? Get my thoughts together here in notes. I've got thousands of little notes between these verses here that I have put in. In chapter 1 and verse 5, she says, dark am I, but lovely. O daughters of Jerusalem, like the tents of Kedar, like the curtains of Solomon. She had sort of a natural beauty. She says she's dark, and there's a reason she's dark. But she says, I'm lovely. She had a natural beauty. She wasn't all made up. I'll tell you a little background. She was just a plain old country girl from down on the farm. In fact, that's where he met her, down on the farm. As I said, we'll see at the end of the book. Just a plain old country girl. And here she comes. Imagine you down from, and some of you are, and from Texas or Kentucky or Tennessee, out of the hills. And suddenly you're thrown in the big city of high fashion, and here are all these beautiful women all made up and wearing Gloria Vanderbilt jeans and the latest styles. And here you are, just a country girl, tanned from the sun, being thrown into the palace of the king. Now, you'd feel a little bit insecure. I know you would. I would too if I were in your situation, if I were a woman. And she says to the daughters of Jerusalem, don't stare at me, for I am dark. And she was a little bit self-conscious. And husbands, realize that about your wives, that they are a little bit self-conscious about how they look. And it is up to you to reaffirm and reconfirm for them that they are still beautiful to you. That's very important to a woman. And Solomon will do this for her a little bit later, as we'll see. But everybody looked at her and said, well, you know, Solomon chose this little old country girl. Don't stare at me, for I am dark. She was very self-conscious about herself. She was a common laborer. She really was, just a farm girl, compared to the ladies of the palace. The sun has scorched me. She had been out in the sun tending the vineyards. My mother's sons were angry with me. Maybe her real brothers, maybe stepbrothers. It says mother's sons, so it could go either way. They appointed me caretaker of the vineyards. In other words, they got mad at her. And they said, okay, sister, we're going to go off and have a good time, and we're going to turn over the responsibility. They were sort of like sharecroppers for Solomon. We're going to turn the responsibility of these vineyards over to you, and you're going to have to work them all by yourself. And they did that. That's a hard way to treat your little sister. They appointed me caretaker of the vineyards. But of my own vineyard, which belongs to me, I have not taken care. In other words, and I'll make this point clear, that sometimes when they talk about the vineyard, they will be talking about a literal field and sometimes about themselves. And in the latter part here, when it says, but of my own vineyard, which belongs to me, I have not taken care, she's talking about her own body. She's talking about her nails and her face and her hair. She just hadn't had the time to beautify herself because she's been working in the fields. And she has a simplicity about her, and I think that attracted Solomon to her because he could have had all these women of the palace, but he wanted her especially. And she had a kind of humility that sort of drew Solomon to her. She hadn't pampered herself like the rest of the girls. So she says this to the daughters of Jerusalem, the ladies of the palace, and then she thinks to herself again in verse 7. In her own mind, she says, tell me, O you whom my soul loves. See, Solomon's nowhere around. This is just her thinking in her mind, fantasizing about her husband-to-be. Tell me, O you whom my soul loves, where you pasture your flock, where you rest them at noon, lest I become a veiled woman by the flocks of your companions. So what does this mean? She wanted to come to Solomon. But she didn't want to traipse all around the city and the pastures looking for him. Why? Well, the key is in the latter phrase when it says, lest I become as a veiled woman. In their culture, the women who went around the streets veiled were considered loose. They were considered like prostitutes. Although she was from the country, the girl had some smarts. She knew how to carry herself, and many women don't know that. They are very indiscreet. And I think that's a part of inner beauty, and this woman had that. She wouldn't just run around loose, chasing after the man, seeming to be aggressive, taken to be a loose woman of the street. She asked, where are you going to be so that I can come to you? Also, it's interesting how considerate she is when it says, where you rest your flock at noon. She wasn't just going to run to him and interrupt him in his work at any time. She was considerate enough to want to come when he had a break. And I think that's important, women, to understand that about a man. At least that's the way I am. When I'm intensely involved in my work or a project or something, I don't like to be disturbed. And I've talked to other men like that. And sometimes when the wife barges in, well, honey, I want you to see this new cake. Sometimes we as men can come on a little harsh in that way. And we don't tend to want to be that way. But that's just the way a man is. When he starts working on some boy, he puts his mind to it and he's doing it. She had enough smarts about her. She was so beautiful inside to realize that about a man, not to interrupt him during his most important hours, to wait till he had a break. Remember that, women. Remember that. There's a lot here. There's an awful lot here. This girl had a lot of discretion. Also, as she thinks about him, she realizes the character that Solomon had, because she compares him to a shepherd. Because she says, tell me, O you whom my soul loves, where you pasture your flock. He was a king, but he had the character of a shepherd, husbands. And a shepherd had to be strong to defend and to provide for his flock. But yet he had to be gentle enough to care for their most minute need. And sometimes, husbands, we get the strong part. We care about protecting them and sheltering them and a place to stay and something to eat. But we forget about that we also have to be gentle. As a shepherd is strong, he is also gentle. And he cares for the need of his flock. It says in the New Testament, Christ did that he would leave the 99 and go after the one. He watched over them. He knew them all. And we need to have that kind of understanding about our wives. We're their shepherds. 1 Peter 3, it says, Peter did, that we must dwell with them according to knowledge. We need to understand how they are and attend to their needs. Let's go on. She's thinking in her mind, now the daughters of Jerusalem speak to her, the bride. The girls of the palace start talking to her in verse 8 again. It says, if you do not know, O most beautiful amongst women, go forth on the trail of the flock and pasture your young goats by the tents of the shepherds. In other words, that's the way to go to find him. And that's how she goes to him. I talked about how country she was, and maybe she didn't take care of herself because working out in the pasture. But you know what made her beautiful as time went on? His love. I've made that statement once or twice in the sermons of the past months and weeks. I've said that I feel that a man, through his leadership, through his love, really can make a woman what he wants her to be. He can shape her into something very beautiful or something very ugly. It is his love that makes her beautiful. And it is Solomon's love that makes her beautiful. Now, the king speaks to his bride to be, in verse 9. He says, to a mare among chariots of Pharaoh, I liken you, my darling. Now, I know that wouldn't be very complimentary for us today to tell our wives, boy, you're just as pretty as an old gray mare, you know. Okay? But as I said, it wouldn't make much sense in our day if Solomon and his bride told us or heard us say, baby, you really turned me on. What do they mean, you know? It wouldn't be very complimentary at all to them. But this is the language of their day. And as I said, the book is written in metaphor and figure of speech to capture the feeling and the depth of the feelings and the emotions that they shared with one another. In fact, you see, the chariots of Pharaoh, they were known. They were known for their beauty. I want to go on and read a little bit. Well, I'll stop there. They were known for their beauty. And Pharaoh's chariots were pulled by teams, pairs of several horses. But out front, they would have the prize mare, the prize horse, that led all the rest of the horses of Pharaoh's number one chariot. So what he is saying here is really a tremendous compliment. He's saying, compared to all the other women around, even all the beauties of the palace, you're number one. You're the prize mare out there leading all the other horses, pulling Pharaoh's chariot. So it's really a compliment. She is the prize one. In verse 10, lovely are your cheeks with ornaments, and your neck like strings of beads. He tells her that she looks good in her new jewelry. Maybe she had some jewelry on. And he noticed that enough. How many times have some of the wives put on a new dress, really prepped themselves up real pretty, come into the room, and the husband, instead of saying, boy, honey, you really look good, they say, hey, what's for supper? You know, and there she goes. There goes her self-esteem. There goes the day for her. And she's prepped herself and made herself all pretty all day for her husband. And the husband comes in, doesn't notice her, and says, where's the supper? But he noticed the one string of beads. She didn't have on a new dress. Just a simple string of beads, and he noticed it. And he complimented her for it. You see the kind of man Solomon was? You see the kind of husband? It's really a model for all husbands who would be lovers to their wives. Now, in verse 11, the daughters of Jerusalem speak to the bride. So I'm trying to show you, the exchange and the discourse sort of in the play here, or the reality, really. The daughters of Jerusalem speak to the bride, or the palace women. It says, chains of gold will we make for you with points of silver. Because he respected her, everybody else did. Do you realize that? The more respect and honor and attention and the greater esteem, men, you give to your wives, the more other people will also notice and esteem her. I have seen that in my own life. I have seen it in the lives of others. You tear her down, others won't respect her. Why should they? If you, her husband, can't respect her and appreciate it, why should anybody else? But because of Solomon's love and his leadership towards her and putting her on a pedestal, everybody else said, wow, she must be something. If the king's going to do this, we'll pitch in and we'll make her even more beautiful. And that happens. That works in our lives as well today. Now in verse 12 here, while the king was at his table, my nard gave its fragrance. Here she is thinking again. She wore this sort of pouch, this nard, that contained fragrances and perfume around her neck. But this nard, this sort of pouch of perfumes that she wore around her neck, is symbolic of her thoughts. Her thoughts are as a fragrance that sort of go out to her man. Just as the perfume that sort of whiffed around the room. That's how her thoughts were. That's how sweet they were towards her husband to be. Again, ladies, are your thoughts that sweet about your husband? If they are, they'll increase. It'll build like a snowball. The more positive you think about him, the more positive he'll become in your eyes. And husbands, vice versa. This same thing applies to your mate. These are in her thoughts. Again, she goes on to speak to herself. A pouch of myrrh is my beloved to me, which lies all night between my breasts. The perfume represented her lover also. The pouch also represented her lover. They're not married yet. But she desires, and she looks forward to the time, like the perfume that lies between her breasts now, she looked forward to when they could be close and intimate, and that he, too, would lie between her breasts. My beloved is to me a cluster of henna blossoms in the vineyards of En-Gedi. En-Gedi was like, it was indeed, in Solomon's time. En-Gedi was an oasis. It was an oasis in the desert there in Israel. And it was very lush and very green. And for miles around it, there was nothing but dry sand. But there were water, there were pools and forest even there, and beautiful flowers. And like the loveliest flower that was there in the oasis, that's how lovely Solomon was to her. The henna blossoms, which were the loveliest flowers of that area. So he was not just an oasis, one in a million, one in an oasis out there. He was the choicest of the choice to her. So it's very important that we think that way. And we see how deeply in love they are. And you see how mere words cannot express the love. That's why imagery is being used. Am I losing anybody? Do you understand where I'm coming from? Do you understand the imagery? Do you grasp the intensity and the feeling of emotion amongst them? If you don't, speak up. It may be a little difficult because I'm going back and forth in another version here. Now, we come to the part, again, where the king, in verse 15, will speak to the bride. Have I skipped a verse here? 13, 14. Okay. The king will now speak to the bride. And, the old song I remember, and I always use song titles because I love music. But the song, how it says, you make me feel brand new. You remember that old one? Well, this is the way they felt. And here they are sort of walking in a country setting, and they're sitting beneath a tree. His love made her feel brand new. His love made her feel beautiful, even though she hadn't taken care of herself. In verse 15, behold, you are beautiful, my darling. He affirms for her beauty. And husbands, sometimes your wives feel a little down. They maybe feel they're not as beautiful to you as they once were, and it's very important that you reaffirm their beauty. And Solomon did that for her. Behold, you are beautiful, my darling. Behold, you are beautiful. Your eyes are doves. That's what he compared them to, like doves. Just a picture of peace. Doves, a symbol of peace and of character. In verse 16, now the bride speaks to the king as they are here in the country and they're talking. She says to him, Behold, you are handsome, my beloved. Before she was just thinking all this in her mind. Now she begins to express it. And I say over and over again, love's got to be verbalized. Just because you told her you loved her before you married, it's very important that you hear it 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years down the road. Behold, you're handsome. She tells her. And wives, we need to hear that too. Some of us go through that midlife crisis too. We get old, bald, and everything else. Hair gets gray, and we wonder if we still have it too. I don't know if you've read much about midlife crisis for men, but we go through it. We see we're getting old. We can't run as fast, can't jump as high, can't do much of anything as good as we used to, maybe. But they say that an older wine is more expensive than a younger one, don't they? But we need to still know that we turn you on, and we need to hear it from you. We always say, husbands, tell your wives you love them, etc., etc., etc. But we husbands, our wives, we need to hear it too. Please tell us. Verse 17. The beams of our houses, verse 17. The beams of our houses are cedars, our rafters are cypress. He says now in chapter 2 and verse 1, I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valley. She felt like a beautiful flower out in nature. They were out here in the country. And after she had expressed love to him and how she felt about him, and he to her, she says, you know what? I don't feel so bad being scorched and unpampered anymore. I feel like, I feel brand new. Like I said, the song, You Make Me Feel Brand New. That's the way their loves made them feel about one another and to themselves. She says, I, as a lily among thorns, even more beautiful, 1 in a million. Thus is my darling among the young women. That's what the king said to her after she had expressed that. He just reaffirms it. Then the bride speaks to the king again in verse 3. As an apple tree among the trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the young men. And maybe Solomon was getting a little old here, maybe entering that midlife crisis period. She says, you know what? You're more beautiful than the young men. You don't have to worry about how old you are. Just because you're pushing 50, don't worry about it. There's an apple tree among the trees of the forest, so is my beloved among the young men. The apple tree was a very prized tree of that time and of that area. So she compliments him, and he's also special to her. And throughout history, the apple tree has been symbolic of romance. It was always under the apple tree. They've had songs under the apple tree, so and so and so. Even back then, it was a symbolic of romance and love. In his shade, the bride speaks, in the latter phrase of verse 3, in his shade I took great delight and sat down, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. Before she worked long hours in the hot sun. Now she was pampered. Now she was sheltered and protected by her husband. And wives need to feel that security. She feels very secure now. When she first came into the courts, saw those beautiful princes around her, she being unpampered, she felt very insecure. Now she feels very secure. And that's very important to a woman. And only, or shall I say, the most effective person that can make a woman feel secure is her husband. How he feels about her. Now, in verse 2, or chapter 2 and verse 4, here she thinks in her mind again. Remind me of the other song there, I love how you love me. I love how you love me. Remember that one? Okay. The bride thinks in her mind, in verse 4, he has brought me to the banquet hall, and his banner is over me, and his banner over me is love. Here she was there with him in the banquet hall. And it wasn't just like a tiger's or a lion's pennant flag. This was a huge banner. Okay? But it was more symbolic because everybody knew. Everybody knew. He made it known to everybody that he loved her. And she loved how he loved her in that way. She really appreciated that. Their love was evident to all like a giant banner. So when it says, he has brought me to the banquet hall and his banner of love is over me, he's saying, hey, everybody knows that he loves me, that I am his woman, that I am special to him. Again, husbands, wives appreciate that. When you make it known that you love her and appreciate her, even to others, praise her before other people. It's not wrong to do that. It makes them feel good. As the song says, I love how you love me, and women love to be loved that way. Now she speaks to the king. Before she was thinking in mind, boy, isn't this great? He lets everybody know that he is in love with me. Like a huge banner, a battle banner. A huge, like these big banners that you see airplanes pulling, or like on the Goodyear blimp, it was sort of illuminated that he loved her. Now, she speaks publicly or verbally in verse 5, sustain me with raisin cakes and refresh me with apples, for I am faint with love. She was weak from being so deeply in love. It can make you that way. Maybe you forgot about it so many years ago, how when you were first in love, how you just sort of felt weak inside. And she said, boy, I am so in love, I just feel weak. Give me some raisin cakes, give me an apple, something to sustain me, because I am so weak from being in love. Then she goes back and she thinks in her mind after she speaks that out. In verse 6, she goes back in soliloquy here and just thinks in her mind, oh, that his left hand were under my head and his right hand embraced me. She doesn't tell him this, but in her mind she's looking forward to that wedding night. She longs to express her love to him physically, but they could not at this time because they weren't married. So she's thinking this in her mind. She can hardly wait. Now in verse 7, to the daughters of Jerusalem is spoken, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or the hinds of the field, not to arouse, not to awaken love until it pleases. Now she's just thought in her mind, boy, I can hardly wait till he touches me, till he embraces me. And we're together intimately on that wedding night. And then she turns around and she says, boy, I wonder what these other women are thinking. And she says to them, now you ladies, you're going to just have to wait. You're just going to have to be patient. I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, not to arouse, not to awaken love until it pleases. In other words, you've got to be patient. And she was sort of speaking to herself too, I've got to wait. I've got to wait. I don't know, some of you are single and perhaps you'll be married soon. I feel that one of the most dangerous times for a couple who are not yet married, who are engaged, to make a mistake sexually before they are married is not when they're, just generally dating, but when they are engaged. It is so tempting. It is very tempting. This is why we recommend short engagements. And you really have to watch yourself, because here she's thinking, they're not married. Boy, if he could just take me now. And then she catches herself and says, I better give some advice to some of the other women here, that they wait, that they be patient, that they not arouse, not awaken love till it pleases, not until marriage. So she exercised patience herself. So it shows the character of her. She could have seduced Solomon. She could have had intercourse with him before the time. But it shows the character of this young woman. She had enough character and enough strength. And we're not talking about converted people with God's Spirit. They were unconverted. Solomon wasn't converted. At least he didn't act like it. And there may be some controversy whether he was or not. But she certainly was not. God wasn't dealing with him spiritually in that way. But she exercised the character. And we'll see at the end of the chapter why she was able to, because it had to do with her upbringing and her parents and her brothers especially. Now, in verse 8, the bride, after speaking to the daughters of the court or the daughters of Jerusalem, she thinks again in her own mind. Am I losing you with going back and forth to who's speaking to who and going back and forth, thoughts in her mind? Am I going too fast? Would you like me to slow down a little bit? All right? Okay. So we'll have to quit about a quarter to 9, because I got to close up here. By 9. Now she thinks in her mind again. Her thoughts go inward again in chapter 2 and verse 8. She says, the sound of my beloved, behold, he's coming. Boy, she just gets excited at his coming. Do you get excited when you hear the car pull up, ladies, in the driveway? Or you say, oh, he's home. Or do you say, boy, you tell kids, hey, daddy's home. Do you get excited? You ought to. I hope the relationship would make it that way. If it isn't, it should be. The sound of my beloved, behold, he's coming. She's excited just because she hears him coming. Deeply in love. Leaping over the mountains, bounding over the hills. That's her Superman, faster than a speeding bullet. Able to leap buildings with a one leaping bound. Able to stop locomotive and all that stuff, okay? She was really in love. That's why it uses this imagery. This was her Superman coming. Ladies, get excited about us that way, huh? Anyway, she was. Okay, now, she pictured him like a Superman, her He-Man. Verse 9. My beloved is like a gazelle or a young stag. Today we'd say a young buck. They say that down south. Okay. Look, he's standing behind our wall, gazing through the windows, peering through the lattice. Perhaps he arrived there, maybe knocked on the door, and she was a little late. Maybe, he's coming. She had to put a little powder on or something. She didn't see him. Didn't get the door fast enough, so he went around. He wasn't a peeping Tom. This is not what this is saying. Maybe she didn't come to the door fast enough, and he goes around to the window to see if anybody's home. Gazing through the windows, peering through the lattice. He knocked, and as I said, no response, so he just looked through the window. See if she was home. Verse 10. My beloved responded and said to me, Arise, my darling, my fair one, and come. For behold, the winter has passed. The rain is over and gone. So here is the setting. It is springtime. And spring is a perfect background for love. That's why I chose, spring to begin the series on marriage and through the summer here, not in the dead of winter. Okay, now, where am I? Verse 11, I've said, springtime. Now, verse 12. The blossoms have appeared in the land. The time of singing has come. The birds are singing. And the cooing of the turtle dove is heard in our land. So it's springtime. The fig trees forms its figs. The fruit is coming out. And the vines in blossom give forth fragrance. Arise, my darling, my beautiful one, and come along. Now, this is also a type of their love. It is a love that is beginning. They're in the springtime of their love. They're beginning of it. And it is beginning to blossom, beginning to bud, not ripe yet, just beginning to mature, just putting out a little semblance of fruit. Now, in verse 14, O my love, in the clefts of the rocks, in the hidden places, O my dove, it says, in other words, in the clefts of the rocks, in the hidden places of the steep pathway. Now, doves in that area hid in the rocks. There are some doves, I guess, today in certain parts, they're called rock doves. They hide in the rocks. Now, she was like this. He didn't know her that well. It was just the spring of the love, just beginning. And he wanted to know her a lot better. That's why he says, come, my love, like the dove that is in the clefts of the rocks. He wanted to bring her out. He wanted to know more about her. Today, in marriages, as young people approach them, they're more interested not in getting to know one another, but the sex and the physical side of it. You see how they're pacing their relationship? First, there's simply, he wants to get to know her. Come on out, my dove that is hid in the rocks. I want to know you better. Let me see your form. Let me hear your voice. For your voice is sweet and your form lovely. He wanted to know her better. Now in verse 15, it says, Let us catch the foxes, the little foxes who ruin, who destroy vineyards. For our vineyards are in blossom. I said earlier that a vineyard could refer literally to the farming area, the vineyard, the physically itself, but it also can refer to the person. And here they are talking about one another. And foxes are known for, in that day anyway, I don't know what they do today, but in that culture, they were known for ruining vineyards, getting in there and tearing them all up. And the foxes here are symbolic of threats to their relationship. Obstacles, temptations, uncontrolled desire, their sex desire, selfishness, unforgiving spirit when they would hurt one another, and I'm sure they did while they were courting. He says, let us. And he doesn't say, hey, I will. He says, let us. Let's work together, honey. Let's work together to catch those foxes, to deal with the problems that we know are going to come about. A couple who enters marriage and says, oh, it's just beautiful, we have no problems, there's nothing we've got to work out, they're being unrealistic. Here they're being realistic about life and about their future. He says, we've got to catch these foxes. We've got to learn how to work out our problems before we get married. At least have a channel of communication so that we can work together. He says, let us. Showing the unity that it takes to solve marital problems. Because they didn't want anything to destroy their love as it was blossoming and maturing just before they were getting married. And the foxes, those little problems of life, would get in there and do that. And so he says, let's deal with them. Let's meet the problems head on. So the vineyards here are the people, the blossom is their love maturing and coming out. In verse 16, here the bride thinks in her own mind now, my beloved is mine. He really cares about a relationship. He doesn't want anything to destroy it. She says, my beloved is mine, and I am his. He who pastures his flock among the lilies. As I mentioned in one of the sermons, that in the Greek, storge, that kind of love of belonging is so very necessary to relationship. To the feeling or the need to belong and the need to be needed. And this is how they felt. My beloved is mine. She felt secure, and I am his. And he pastures his flock among lilies. Again, she refers to his shepherd qualities. And that's why they could be so close, because he had the strength of a shepherd and the gentleness of a shepherd. Verse 17. And she thinks in her mind, until the day breeze and the shadows flee. Turn, my beloved, and be like a gazelle or a young stag on the mountains of separation. She's thinking in her mind, again, a little physically. She's thinking, she says, I can hardly wait until we're married, until we can savor the sweet wine of love, until we can lay in each other's arms all night, until the shadows flee, until the day breeze, from midnight or whatever time at night to sunrise. And he can be like a gazelle or a young stag on the mountains of separation. The mountains of separation are her breast. Hope you're not embarrassed by that. But that's what it's talking about. She longed when they could have that intimacy and that closeness. And he could lie between her breast all night. And they could have that intimacy and that closeness. She's asking that one day, and she looked forward to the day that their marriage could be physically consummated. That's verse 17. Now, we look in chapter 3. Check something here in King James just a moment. Let's go to chapter 3 and verse 1. Here we approach the time just before the wedding night, or it probably is a wedding night. And you ever notice perhaps a big event that's coming up the next day, how that night it's so hard to sleep? Maybe for some of you are younger, maybe it's a sporting event, a basketball game, a championship game's coming up the next day and you can't sleep that night. Or maybe the next day you're to go shopping or go on your vacation. I have a hard time sleeping before vacations or something. You're so excited. And that night, because you can't sleep, it just seems like the longest night in history. You just can't get your wits about you to relax and go to sleep. Well, here is the night before the wedding. The wedding is going to take place the next day. And here's the night before the wedding. And here she is, filled with anxiety before the wedding. She's thinking, what if I lose him? What if he changes his mind at the last moment? Any of you ladies ever thought that way before you were married? Let me see the hands. No, I don't have to put them on. Maybe one or two. What if he changes his mind? What if he doesn't show up? What if I change my mind? This is the way she was thinking the night before the wedding. She tossed and turned all night. When she did sleep, she probably had a nightmare about what happened, and I think this is what it's describing. When she finally did get to sleep, she had a nightmare about it. She had this horrible dream. She was so filled with anxiousness about that day that she had looked forward to for so long. In chapter 3 and verse 1, upon my bed in the night, I sought him whom my soul loves. That night, she wanted him there. He was sleeping in his room or in his palace, and she was in her room just waiting. And she wanted to have him right then. Upon my bed in the night, I sought him whom my soul loves. I really, really wanted him. I sought him, but I did not find him. Of course, because he was someplace else. And maybe this is a dream she's having too the night before. Verse 2, I'll arise now and go about the city. So she sees herself in the dream. She gets up out of bed. Where's Solomon? She's night walking or whatever in her mind. And she's looking, searching the city. In the streets and in the squares, she's looking for him. In her dream, I will seek him whom my soul loves. I sought him. I looked everywhere, but I could not find him. Verse 3, the watchman or the police out there that night who go about in the city, they found me. And I said, Have you seen him whom my soul loves? Scarcely had I passed from them when I found him whom my soul loves. This is a dream. I held on to him and would not let him go. You know, a dream, boy, she held on to him. I'm not going to let you go now. Until I brought him to the house of my mother, to the room of the one who conceived me. Now, in her dream, she takes him home. Why? Well, you know, when we were afraid, who did we run to? Mama. And in her dream, the insecurity there, the fear in the streets, wandering around searching for him. When she finally finds him, she takes him to the only place that she has known in the past that brought her security and a feeling of safety, and that was home. In her dream, she took him home into her mother's room. So home is symbolic of the security that she found. Now she speaks, I guess, that next morning or whatever to the daughters of Jerusalem, or it may be still in the dream. Verse 5, I adjure you, I urge you, O daughters of Jerusalem, by the gazelles or the hinds of the field, not to arouse, not to awaken love until it pleases. She gets all impatient, but she can always give that advice to the other girls. Just hold on, just wait. Maybe she's trying to convince herself at the same time as she speaks to the other girls of the palace. Just hold on, just wait. You got to be patient. As the song says, you can't hurry love. Not married yet, I just got to wait. It's only 6 more hours to that wedding, you know, until we are man and wife. So you see the excitement that is there. Did you realize that all of this was there? How many of you ever read the Song of Solomon thoroughly? When you read it, did you realize all this was taking place? I didn't myself. I had gone through it in college. And it wasn't until I sat down and did the research and asked God to inspire it and read some books that I was able to really see what's going on here. And I hope it's becoming clearer to you because it's really exciting. I wish they would make a movie about this and show all the emotion of the young girl and all the love between the two of them. It would be very beautiful. Of course, Hollywood would louse it up. But let's stick to the book. The book in most movies are always better than the movie version anyway. Well, let's go on. So here's the wedding song. Now we come to the wedding day. She didn't sleep all night. She threw some water on her face, got dressed. In chapter 3 here in verse 6, we come to the wedding procession. She says, what is this coming from the wilderness, like columns of smoke? From the burning of myrrh and frankincense. It wasn't the dust the horses were kicking up. It was the fragrance that was being broadcast in the streets, the myrrh and the frankincense, it was burning, made from all the scented flowers of the merchant. So here we see a wedding procession. In our culture, the procession is highlighted. The focus of attention is on whom? The woman, right? A little bit different in their culture. And you know, when Jesus Christ returns to marry the church, who's the attention going to be on? It's going to be on the groom. That's where the attention is going to be focused. And in their culture, it was the same way. The procession was not to focus the woman and to highlight her, but it was the man, as we see here. So who do we see come in verse 7? Behold, it is the couch or the coach of Solomon. All of this smoke and all this sweet-smelling aroma, you thought Sleeping Beauty was going to pop out of the smoke, but it's old man Solomon. Now, 60 mighty men around this coach or couch from the mighty men of Israel. He had a full military wedding. It was like the wedding we witnessed a week or so ago with Prince Charles and Lady Diana. But this time, Prince Charles, or King Solomon, was the one highlighted. And he had all of his shining gold and on the coach. And he had his military men there, 60 of them, 60 groomsmen. Boy, what a wedding. Mighty men of Israel in full military dress, and all of them wielders of the sword. They had their swords at their side, glistening in the sun, trained for battle, each his sword at his side for protection from the terrors of the night. And here is in symbolism showing Solomon's ability to protect and to provide for his bride. Not only was it a show of glamour and ornate situation, but it was also showing that I am the man. And I have the power and the authority to provide for you, to take care of you, to protect you. Just as Christ returns in great honor and glory with his sword on a white horse and all of this, and the angels with him, his mighty men, to protect us, to when we were resurrected, to be caught up in the air. The same way the message is gotten across physically here. In verse 9, a palanquin King Solomon made for himself from the timber of Lebanon. And Lebanon, they would always go up to the north country of Lebanon to get the choicest woods. That's where you got quality wood, the best quality. This is what this is symbolic of. In verse 10, he made its post of silver, its back of gold, its seat of purple cloth, its interior inlaid with expressions of love, best wishes, in other words, from the daughters of Jerusalem, from the other maidens of the court and the palace. And all of this is there to show the best quality. The silver and the gold, to show that this is a quality relationship from beginning to end, as we'll see. Nothing but the best. Not just showing off all the gold and silver, but trying to show that, hey, this marriage is something special. There's quality there. And also showing that each mate should bring out the best qualities in the other mate. Really, I think you ought to do that. And single people, when you look for a mate, this might sound a little selfish, but you ought to look for somebody that's not going to tear you down. It's somebody who's going to bring out the best in you. And I think my wife brings out whatever good I got in me, out in me. And I hope I bring a little bit out in her too. And that's what it ought to be. You ought to uplift one another. And a lot of that is done through encouragement, just as Solomon was reaffirming her and her to him. Through encouragement, positive affirmation, positive reinforcement. Really. Instead of nagging and tearing each other down. So this is symbolic of their relationship and bringing out the best in one another. Now, in verse 11, go forth, O daughters of Zion, and look upon King Solomon with the crown with which his mother has crowned him on the day of this wedding and on the day of the gladness of his heart. It was a really spectacular event. Now, let's go to the wedding night. I want to go to the wedding night. They're married now, and it's interesting again, surely she was in the picture, but it just doesn't mention her. It puts the emphasis on the man. Now, husbands, should we lay back and nudge our wives in the ribs? See there, back then they really knew how it ought to be. The man was highlighted and so forth. Well, with opportunity, with highlighting, with the authority comes responsibility. He was highlighted because he had a tremendous responsibility for her welfare. He that is chief among you, Christ said, ought to be your servant. Yes, he was highlighted because he was given an awesome responsibility. Now, let's go to the wedding night. I want to go to the wedding night. They're married now, and it's interesting again, surely she was in the picture, but it just doesn't mention her. It puts the emphasis on the man. Now, husbands, should we lay back and nudge our wives in the ribs? See there, back then they really knew how it ought to be. The man was highlighted and so forth. Well, with opportunity, with highlighting, with the authority comes responsibility. He was highlighted because he had a tremendous responsibility for her welfare. He that is chief among you, Christ said, ought to be your servant. Yes, he was highlighted because he was given an awesome responsibility. Over and over, more times than it does to the woman, the Bible tells husbands, love your wives. Over and over and over again. So it wasn't so for him to be the big muggity muck, Chief Tamawana or whatever. It was for the purpose of him serving his bride and giving to her. Just as Christ serves the church. Yes, Christ has more glory than the church. But Christ does more work than the church. He has done more sacrifice. He has given his life for the church. Can I, as a husband, say that I have sacrificed, that I've been a sacrificial lover and husband as much as Christ has to the church? I cannot. And neither can any of us here, I don't think. But it should be our goal, and we ought to be striving for it, and we ought to be working awfully hard on it. As we'll see Solomon. And boy, I wish I was like him in many ways, that we'll see a little bit later. When they confront a problem after they're married and how he deals with it. Boy, it's just choice. It's just choice. Let's go here now to chapter, let's see, where was I? Talking 50 miles a minute here. Chapter 4. Chapter 4. Here, the wedding's over. And now we come to the wedding night. Now we come to what she's been dreaming about, those little thoughts, how she desired his embrace, how she desired him to lie between her breasts all night. Now we come to the part where it's legal, where she can do it, where it's beautiful. I think I'll stop with get through the wedding night before I get into the problem. You know, the old song, "Don't Rain on My Parade." Well, they got a little rain that came on their parade, and we'll save that for next time, but we'll see how it goes. But I want to get into, I've taken you through the courtship. We've seen the wedding. Now we're going to see the wedding night. We'll see what kind of time we've got. And maybe I'll just stop and open it up for questions before we get into the maturing part of their marriage. So you get married and then you mature. And they had to do some maturing. Both of them grew an awful lot after they got married, as we'll see. And how even sexually they matured and became even more perfected lovers, as the Scripture reveals. So, now they're married. Now in chapter 4 and verse 1, we get into the wedding night. And here they verbalize their love. "Behold, you're beautiful, my darling. Behold, you're beautiful." That's what he tells her. Boy, you're beautiful on that wedding night. Reassures her again. "Your eyes are dull from behind your veil." They're bright and alert. You know, I can see through the veil that it's so bright and alert. "Your hair is like a flock of goats." Now, I know again, ladies, you would be a little bit offended if your husband says, "Oh, wow, your hair is like a flock of goats there," you know. But again, you must understand that this is romantic imagery, this is a metaphor, this is a romantic language of their day. They lived in an agrarian society, you know. So, use a different term. This was a tremendous compliment. You know, "Your hair is like a flock of goats, which descend from Mount Gilead." Now, this was a picture that she could identify in her mind to capture the feeling of his emotion. And he could identify with. Because Mount Gilead was an area that the people, the shepherds, watered their flocks and fed them. And when it was time to bring them down into the valley, in the evening time, it was a beautiful sight to see over Mount Gilead with the sun setting and the golden rays of the sun. And then flowing down, you know, from a distance, you'd see all these thousands of goats and sheep flowing down, coming down the sides of the mountain. It was a beautiful sight to see. And this is the way her hair flowed, very beautifully. And it looked like, from a distance, how the goats from a distance looked coming down from the mountain. And it was flowing, a beautiful sight with the rays of the sun there. So you understand what I'm trying to say. It was a very apropos compliment to her. Now, verse 2. Again, you know, let me just stop here. On a wedding night, some of you who are, you know, singles who are going to get married, or those who will be hearing the tape later. On a wedding night, a wife is going to be a little bit self-conscious. You know, we talked about her self-consciousness when she was first brought from the country into the palace. She wasn't pampered. And she's going to feel a little bit uptight because the first time you're going to be seeing her body. And we all know ourselves, our deficiencies physically. Now, you may not notice them, but she knows her body, and she knows she'd like to have a little bit more over here, a little bit more over there. And she might feel very insecure the first time. And it's very important that night for the husband to, again, reassure her that she is still beautiful to him, so that she can feel confident about herself. Even after marriage, husbands, it is important that you let her know that sexually and in every other way, your wife is still pleasing to you. To reassure her. You know, he didn't just say, "Okay, we're married, you know, lay down and here we go." You know, 1, 2, 3, there goes the starting gun, boom, there goes a pistol, and we're off to the races, and there he goes around the corner. Okay, no. That's not the way he started out. Like us again, like a $10,000 bottle of French wine. You don't guzzle it like Rip. You sip it. You savor it. You slowly enjoy it. You prepare it. You put it in the right kind of glass. Take the cork out. You smell the aroma of the cork even. Pour a little bit in the glass. Swish it around and smell the fragrance and the bouquet of it. See what I'm trying to say? You see the example? You see how he approached his wife? And even after they were married, he uses the same, for a while. You'll see he uses the same approach, husbands, that we ought to use. Take time for love. And some of you, I know I have some people here who are widows, not even married. You can teach this to others now and in the world tomorrow. So don't think that this is just, and I should have clarified that too, just for married people, because it isn't. I just wanted the audience to be a little bit more mature. It is something that we all need now and can help others with in the future. So he goes on to praise her. He says, even your teeth, ultra bright now, even your teeth are like a flock of newly shorn sheep, which have come up from the washing. He says, he compared it to what they thought was beautiful. Like sheep that are newly shorn, they're clean and they come up, and how when you wash your dog, he just shakes himself off and stuff, and how bright and clean now. And they were like bright, clean little sheep there, her teeth were. Praises her in detail. He didn't say, oh, baby, you're beautiful, now let's get to it. No, he took his time again, and in detail he praises her. Your teeth are like a flock of newly shorn sheep, which have come up from the washing, all of which are paired. All of them are there, none missing. You can say that even if they're false, and you can take them out. I told my wife, we were driving along in the car, I got a flipper here, one tooth right there. Some of you may have known was missing. I finally got one there. And I got it, was it yesterday? Was it? And my mouth doesn't feel quite right talking with it. And I said, honey, I might, this Sabbath get up there and start preaching and this thing don't feel right. I'm going to say, y'all excuse me, I'll take this thing out and drop it in the water right there. She says, boy, people will be offended. I said, well, maybe I'll sound better. Anyway, all of the teeth that she had anyway, and if all of your mates aren't there, at least praise them for what they have. He says, all of which are paired. They were all there, and not one of them is alone. She wasn't there, the bride, and wearing that, hanging down there, like me or something. But they were all, and none of them were alone. Just praise her. Like a scarlet thread are your lips, and your mouth is lovely. He doesn't say, your mouth is like a big, rope to dock a ship, And it's not talking about the size of her lips at all. I just said that so that you'd understand this. Many people who recognize quote-unquote beauty, call themselves authorities, say that the way a woman's features, whether they be large or small, the way that they are aligned really add to her beauty. Whether it's broad features or very thin, fine ones, it doesn't matter. But the lines that they carry really add to their beauty. And this is what he's saying here. He's saying, like a scarlet thread are your lips. Your lines are so beautiful. I've heard people talk about cars. Boy, the lines on that car are beautiful. Have you heard that? You know what I'm saying? Okay. And your mouth is lovely. She had a very distinct outline of her lips. Your temples are like a slice of pomegranate. Your face looks like a slice of watermelon. But again, this was a compliment. Your temples are like a slice of pomegranate behind your veil. This not only referred to her temples, but also her cheeks. When you cut a pomegranate, when you cut it in half, it is sort of flesh. It's sort of reddish color, but not a strong red, but like a woman's face in color that is flesh, sort of reddish. So he is complimenting her color and the fleshness of her cheeks. Very detailed here. Like the Tower of David is your neck. Boy, you got a neck like a linebacker. No, he's not saying that. Not at all. He says, like the Tower of David is your neck, built for warfare, old battle axe. No. 1,000 shields hang upon it, and all the shields of the mighty men. Now, the Tower of David, her neck wasn't that thick and strong and all that. That's not what he's talking about. The Tower of David was known for its, is a term, impregnability. It was hard to tear it down. It was very strong. It was the most solid. Like today we would say, you're as solid as the rock of Gibraltar. Well, then they would say, well, you're as solid as the Tower of David. And he's referring to her character. And often in Scripture and in culture, when one refers to somebody's neck, he is talking about their character. God called the children of Israel stiff-necked, and that meant that they were rebellious. Here he talks about her being, in character-wise, a woman who had upstanding character. It was hard to tear that character down. And he loved her for that as well. So even in the midst of praising her for all of her fears, physical characteristics, he praises her for her character as well. Verse 5, your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle. And again, this wouldn't go over too well today, which feed among the lilies. What are you saying here? He's complimenting her about her breast. Not necessarily about the size of them or anything like that, but that they are appealing to her. We are a society that just are bosom crazy, I feel. No? Yeah, I think you know what I'm saying. Well, every time you turn on TV, that's what's happening. And he enjoyed her breasts, and you should enjoy the breasts of your wife. But he was not saying that she looked like Dolly Parton. That's immaterial. What he's saying is that they were attractive to her. And that when he saw them, they were like, the feeling came over him like when one sees a fawn, a baby deer, or twin gazelles, little deers. So cute. That inspire the feeling, you've seen the movie Bambi about the baby deer, just very cute. That inspire the desire to fondle them, to hold them, to caress them. And that's not wrong, husbands. And I think you realize that. I hope none of us are so prudish and Victorian that we realize that that is fine to do. And this is what her breast inspired in him, to fondle them. I know Solomon also said in Proverbs, don't quote me on the verse, I read it once, Scripture says, with the wife of your youth, always be ravished with her love, and let her breast satisfy you always. And breasts are a symbol of physical love. And I guess that's why we overdo it in this society as far as size and people getting hormone shots and all of this stuff. But it is to inspire natural affection from a man to his wife. And he says, your breasts are like two fawns, like two little baby deers that I'd love to play with, that I want to caress and hold in an affectionate way, tender and soft. Verse 6, until the day breathes and the shadows flee. Remember before, she was silently thinking in her mind, boy, I wish, just like this little pouch of frankincense and myrrh that I am wearing between my breasts, I long for the time. And she never told him this, but she thought when she was there in the court, boy, I long for the time when he can lie between my breasts until the morning comes. And now it becomes a reality for her. Until the day breathes and the shadows flee, I will go my way to the mountain of myrrh and the hill of frankincense. The mountain of myrrh and the hill of frankincense are her breast. Now, I should have stopped, because he mentions breast again I should have stopped in verse 6, and I will now, and we'll go back to the frankincense and myrrh. Here, if you go back and count from verse 1, we see that he has verbalized 7 characteristics of her beauty. And in the Scripture, 7 is God's number for perfection. And to him, she was a perfect 7 or a perfect 10. We'll say 7 for now. Later, we will see them making love a year after they're married. And then he gives her, interestingly enough, a 10. At the end, we'll see a love-making scene. We'll see intercourse. And before the intercourse, a year after they're married, full year, he lists 10 characteristics of her beauty and her sexual prowess. And 10 is also God's number for perfection, the 10 Commandments. And now later on, she'll become a perfect 10, just showing that love ought to mature, and our appreciation for one another ought to grow, that you ought to think more of one another 1 year, 5 years, 10, 20 down the road more than you thought the first year. It ought to grow that way, and we see it growing and maturing a little bit later on. So he names 7 characteristics of her, showing that. Now, after that, I would wonder, I referred to chapter 2 and verse 17 again, when she thought this. She may have just told him that really pleased her, for him to, after the lovemaking, just to lie between her breasts all night, to have that closeness. Now, there are different phases that we'll go into when we get into sex technique a little bit later after the Song of Solomon. As I can remember from my notes now, there are 4 phases of lovemaking. There's the excitement phase that has to do with verbalization of the love, and then that's verbal foreplay. We've just gone through that. And then physical foreplay, that's excitement phase. Then there is the plateau phase, which is the actual intercourse. And then the third phase is the, what did I term it? Well, the climax or orgasm. And then the fourth phase is the resolution phase. And that is where, after the lovemaking, you just sort of are close to one another. You lie in one another's arms, and you touch, and you fondle even after the intercourse, and you sort of are resolved to one another. And she longed for that, and they did that. They followed those phases, those 4 phases, and after the lovemaking, they went into the resolution phase and slept in each other's arms all night. And she had a desire fulfilled that he lie between her breasts, between the mountain of myrrh and the hill of frankincense all night. You are altogether fair, my love. And this is after the lovemaking. He continues to praise her. You are altogether fair, my love, and there is no blemish in you. Again, even a woman needs to be reassured after. He summarizes here then in verse 7 her beauty. You are altogether fair, my love, and there is no blemish in you. He praises, and he makes her feel very, very secure that first night. Perhaps I should end now in chapter 4 before we have a few raindrops on their parade and see how they handle that and their second honeymoon and some things after that even. Maybe I ought to just save that for next time and open it up for any questions that you might have about tonight. I think I will save chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8. It's 8 chapters to next time, because I don't want to rush through this. And I hate to. This is a fine time to break it off, because we've got them married. They've consummated the marriage. And I don't want to get into the problem, because once I get into the problem, it's going to take me about a good 15, 20, 30 minutes to get into the problem and how they resolve it, how he handles her in the problem. And don't read ahead. Wait for surprise. I know you say, well, what is that problem? And how did he handle it? Save it for next time. Okay? Let's just break off here. We've got to vacate the building. We've got to be out of here by 9 o'clock anyway. So I don't want to take general Bible questions, but questions about marriage in particular here, questions about the Song of Solomon. Have any? I mean, we can be open here, I think, and if you need to be. Next time we see them making love, it's going to be much more intimate, than this, and he gets much more physical and detail about her body. I told my wife, I was listening to a WXYZ last week, and they had the publisher of a new magazine for big women. And I was telling her how, the models you see on television and magazines, they're so thin. And that's fine. My wife has been thin for years. That's fine. She's getting a little heavier now. People are coming up and asking us, are you pregnant? And she's not. Hope I'm not embarrassing you. But I thought I'd say that because I said that for 2 reasons. Because I know, and I'm very pleased that she, is, and I was pleased before, but even more pleased now and so forth as you grow in your appreciation of one another. And I know people wonder sometimes, wow, when is Mrs. Williams pregnant? And people get to, hovering around the congregation, so you don't have to ask us. I'll tell you she's not, but she's just gaining a little bit. She's jogging and lifting weights and so forth. But anyway, what was I talking about? Oh, yeah, how that we are given from Madison Avenue to believe that what a man really desires is a woman who is very, very thin. But really, they've taken surveys and found that most men find women who are a little bit, more on the plump side, a lot more appealing when you get down to it than women who are on the thin side. Now, if you're thin, I don't want to offend you or anything, okay? I can understand that. No problem. But there's a section here where when Solomon praises her on their second honeymoon, a year after marriage, he says, your belly is like a sack of wheat. and I really found that interesting. Now, I wasn't saying that she was necessarily overweight, but he found that appealing. He found that appealing. And I'm just speaking here plainly, most men, as I think it's Mark Scott, he says, well, hey, frankly, I like something to hold on to, on the radio there. But it was just interesting. It reminded me of that radio program about larger women. And when I read that in the Song of Solomon on their second honeymoon, a year after they were married, and he was about to make love to her, and he admired her stomach, and he said that it's like a sack of wheat. And it was just very, like I say, they had a way to describe things. And today that would offend some of you ladies, but to her that was a compliment. And she talked about his stomach too, and it wouldn't. And I forget what she said about his, but it wouldn't turn me on. But I hope you understand the imagery that they're speaking in. I find it a very interesting book, and as it goes along, it even gets more interesting and very helpful, and sets a pattern for all lovers. And that's, you ought to seek to be like Solomon, men, in this way, and wives, you ought to seek to be like that Shulamite bride. It's something very beautiful. I see a hand up. Next Bible study is next week, 7 o'clock here at Wednesday. I think that's fine, isn't it? And we'll go through chapters 5, 6, and 7. At least I think I've finished 4 here. No, I haven't even finished chapter 4. Wow. Why didn't you folks say something? See, y'all not sharp. I said, any question you just said, Mr. Williams, you're not finished. Yeah, I got to get verse 8 here. Well, you got a question, Tom?
I was just wondering if through this Bible study, my wife could learn to enjoy my sack of wheat.
Well, I don't get into those kind of things. Take care of that at home. Yeah, I haven't finished chapter 4 here. What's wrong with me? Get carried away sometimes. Now I got to hustle. Because I've got how many verses yet to cover? Well, I got 8 more verses yet to cover. Well, hold on to your seat. Now, having praised her, even after the lovemaking, wait a minute. Maybe they haven't. Maybe I went too fast here. They hadn't yet made love. He just talks about that he's going to lay all night there. And before the lovemaking here, maybe. Yeah, we're still in the excitement phase. Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. I don't know my lovemaking, do I? They're still in the excitement phase, according to Scripture here. Wait a minute, let me just back up here. Okay, he's still prays. Verse 5, he prays her about her breast. They hadn't done it. See, I want to get to the point too soon. He prays her in verse 5 about her breast in review here. Then in verse 6, he summarizes and says, or talks about that he's going to lie with her all night, even after they have made love. He talks about the mountain of myrrh and the hill of frankincense. In other words, he's saying there, I wanted to comment about that. He uses myrrh and frankincense to say that, hey, your breasts are intoxicating to me, just like the fragrance is. In verse 7, he summarizes, you're altogether fair, my love, and there's no blemish in you. So he continues to reassure her. They haven't got to the lovemaking phase. Now, he is still in mental foreplay. There should be first mental foreplay in the excitement phase, and then physical foreplay. And he is still in the mental foreplay here. Now, verse 8. With me from Lebanon, O bride, with me from Lebanon come, journey from the peak of Amana, and from the peak of Sinar in Hermon, from the dens of lions in the mountains of leopards. Now, what in the world is he talking about? He says, come with me from Lebanon. Was she over in Lebanon on that wedding night? What did she do? Catch the first flight out when he says, this is it, baby? No. She was right there. But her thoughts maybe weren't altogether focused on him. And what he is saying, he calls her thoughts from afar. From Lebanon, O bride, come and journey from the peak of Amana and from the peak of Sinnar and Hermon. So he says, come to me. I want your thoughts. I want to have total focusing. And for love making to be good, you've got to have total attention towards one another. You can't be fantasizing about something else, what you're going to do the next day or anything else. That's why foreplay is so important. And your love making will be a lot more pleasurable if you'll take the time to focus your minds first on one another through this mental foreplay of praising one another verbally. Now, in the last phrase, from the dens of lions and the mountains of leopards, he is talking about fear. Dens of lions, mountains of leopards. He wants to erase out of her mind all fear about that first night. As I mentioned earlier, brides have a great deal of insecurity and anxiety about that first night and how it's going to go, the pain or whatever. And he says, come away from the fear. Just think about me. And leave your fears behind. Again, the purpose of foreplay is to focus. There are three purposes. Let me list some of them. To focus one's thoughts totally on the other mate. To prepare the heart emotionally for genuine giving. And then to prepare physically. And that's what he's doing. He says, look, let's forget everything else. Let's just make the world go away. That's another song title. Make the world go away. Whatever it says. There. And that's what you've got to do to one another first. Focus on one another. See, this takes time. You can't do this, as I said, right after the action news. I mean, this takes some time. So he requests that she come away mentally to him, the dens of lions, this fear. Now, we go on to the next verse, verse 9. Now a taste of honey. A song, a taste of honey. Now they will have a taste of honey. Verse 9. You have made my heart beat fast, my sister, my bride. Now, sister in that term, you don't want to think about, on that first night, your wife is your sister. But in their time, sister was an affectionate term. So that's why he calls her sister. You have made my heart beat fast, my sister, my bride. It's an affectionate term for a wife of that day. You have made my heart beat fast with one glance of your eyes. Remember I talked about in those sermons how important eye contact is in marriage? How important it is for you to look into the eyes of your mate? Even in a crowd, how it turns your wife on if you look over. Maybe you're talking to some people and she's on one side of the congregation and you look over and your eyes meet hers as she glances up at you. That really turns a woman on. And evidently it turned Solomon on. So learn to look at one another. Look into one another's eyes. It means an awful lot. With one glance of your eyes, with one jewel of your necklace. How beautiful are your caresses, my sister, my bride. How much better are your caresses than wine. Again, he compares this relationship here and how one drinks wine, fine wine, and the fragrance of your perfumes than any spice. Now, I want to stop here and say something. Ladies, nice girls do too. Perhaps in your background you thought that only it was the bad girls that caressed men. And before they were married, they are bad girls. Donna Summer had a song out, Bad Girls. Well, you become a good girl when you do that in marriage. It is right, it is proper, and as your love and sexual relationship matures, for a woman to feel free to initiate lovemaking. To feel free to caress her husband's body. Husbands need that too. Now, we've always looked at it primarily, this foreplay is preparing the woman. But the husband is also being prepared. And you have a part in that. You should feel free, and you should communicate, husbands and wives should communicate back and forth what feels good to you. You should not be too ashamed or bashful to let your mate know the type of caresses, where that you'd like to be caressed that would be most pleasing to you. And she took the initiative here. He says, how beautiful. I really appreciate you caressing me. And sometimes we think, why is it? Maybe husbands to touch us. No. You also have a part in the lovemaking process to touch your husband, to turn him on, to stimulate him. How beautiful are your caresses. Well, he says amen to that. He really enjoyed that, my sister, my bride. How much better are your caresses than wine, and the fragrance of your perfumes than any spice. Your lips, my bride, drip honey. Honey and milk are under your tongue. The Frenchman did not invent French kissing. It was around a lot longer before the French were. Well, of course, they were around. They were one of the 12 tribes of Israel, Reuben. But Solomon knew about it, and his bride knew about it. And it's not wrong to kiss one another in that way. Your lips, my bride, drip honey. Honey and milk are under your tongue. And how did he know that honey and milk was under her tongue unless his tongue was there? And the fragrance of your garments is like the fragrance of Lebanon. So he really enjoys this. And this is the physical foreplay now. And it is a two-way street. Physical foreplay, I will repeat again, is a two-way street. Now in verse 12, now they have had the mental foreplay, the physical foreplay. I'm running out of time, so let's hurry. Now we're leaving the excitement phase. Now we go into the plateau phase, which is intercourse. Verse 12. A garden lot is my sister, my bride. He praises her for her virginity. A spring lot, a fountain seal. She's kept herself for her husband. Your shoots are a paradise of pomegranates. He's talking about her genitalia, if that's the proper term, with excellent fruit, and he praises her for that. He gets very intimate in his description. Henna blossoms with nard plants. Her body is described as a beautiful garden, a fruitful garden, heretofore locked up and preserved for him. Verse 14, nard and saffron and calamus and cinnamon, with all trees of frankincense, myrrh, and aloe, whatever that is, aloes? I don't know what that is. With all the choicest of spices, a garden, a fountain, a well of living water, and streams flowing from Lebanon. So he praises her for her virginity. That's him speaking to her. Now verse 16 we switch. And now she speaks to him. She talks to him. She now invites her to take her. Or invites him to take her. Verse 16, awake, O north wind, and come, wind of the south. Blow upon my garden and let its spices flow forth. May my beloved come to his garden and eat its excellent fruit. Now the garden may be enjoyed, all of it. Before, they had to wait. Now nothing is held back, and nothing should be held back in marriage. Should have written down the scripture. It says in Hebrews, I don't know if it's 6 or 12, 6 and 12 for some reason is ringing in my mind. Paul said that in marriage it is holy, and the bed is holy and undefiled. And here they hold back nothing. And it is pleasant, and it is good. We're going to come to a surprise here just in a minute. May my beloved come to his garden and eat his excellent fruit. She gives herself totally and completely to him. And a woman enjoys the sexual relationship most when she totally surrenders. Many women have problems with orgasm. We'll get into that when we get into technique and so forth. Because they are unable, whether there are problems in the marriage or just simply unable to because of past teachings about sex and the Victorian approach. They're for some reason sometimes unable to totally surrender themselves mentally, to surrender themselves physically. And when the woman is not able to do that, orgasm is just about impossible. But here she just totally surrenders herself mentally and physically to him and invites him to come and to take her. I'm going to go into chapter 5 a little bit here. From verse, let's see, check something in King James very quickly. Chapter 5, verse 1. We get into that just a little bit here. Maybe verse 2. Just a moment. Chapter 5 and verse 1. The king speaks now to her. I have come into my garden, my sister and my bride. I have gathered my myrrh with my balsam. I have eaten my honeycomb with my honey, and I have drunk my wine with my milk. They had had a love feast. They have now been able to enjoy themselves totally. He gives an acclamation of his sexual fulfillment. And he says, I've come to my garden, I've taken my honey and the honeycomb, and I have drunk my wine with my milk. So they had a very successful first night, although most first nights are not that successful. It's sometimes very painful. But it was very successful with them. Not so much of the physical, but because they loved one another so much, and because they were able to give themselves to one another without any reservations. Now, I am missing something. Let me check something here. I wanted to make another comment before we cut this off, before we end this first night. Yeah, now let me find where I want to pick this up at. The latter part of verse 1. Okay. I'm going to take this from the King James because I want to show you something here. And I had it marked here and I can't find it. This is broken up a bit, so please hang with me here while I find. Yeah, here it is. I should have marked that. Now, I want to read. See, I only read where he said, I've come to the garden, I've taken the spice, the honey with the honeycomb, and I've drunk the wine with my milk. Now, semicolon, in the King James, it says, eat, O friends. Well, who in the world is this coming into the bedroom on that wedding night as they're having intercourse and saying, eat, O my friends? Now, certainly this isn't what, you don't need those kind of friends. Hey, we thought we left you at the reception. Go home. Right? You don't need those kind of friends. Let not your foot be found too often in your neighbor's house, Solomon said, and especially on the wedding night. And somebody chimes in the sex act and says, eat, O friends. This is not the bride. This is not Solomon. Eat, O friends. Drink ye, drink abundantly, O beloved. In the New American Standard Version it says, eat, O loved ones. Drink and be drunk. Be intoxicated with it. Do it to it, as they say. O lovers, who in the world is this? I said in the beginning, in the background of the book, there are three principal characters. Solomon, the Shulamite bride, and God. Here God, in the very act of marriage, in the very love-making process, steps in and says, go to it. He says, eat, O loved ones, drink and be intoxicated, O lovers. Not with wine, but with love-making, with sex. Here God himself steps in this very crucial time. Perhaps even, doesn't say it, but my paraphrase, maybe even at the time of orgasm here, he tells them to enjoy it. He says it's good. He says it has my blessing. He says drink abundantly. Be intoxicated with it, O lovers. God giving his stamp of approval to romance, to sex, to intercourse and marriage as something beautiful. The intensity there, God even says, as we saw that in Deuteronomy 6:5, it says, love, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart and your soul. Uses the same term for love here in the Song of Solomon. That same intensity we ought to have towards God, even as we have towards our mates. But God says, hey, it's beautiful, do it. Imbibe in it. It's a blessing. And it ought to be a blessing to every marriage, but I know it can be a curse. That's why I'm going through this, to try to give you a pattern for your love. It is a pattern for lovers. It is a song for lovers. Let's end it here. The wedding night is complete. God has stepped in and said, amen, hallelujah. And now, next time, we'll get into day in, day out, living in their marriage. And we'll see. Let's make it a soap opera. We'll see next week. What happens when Solomon comes home from work one evening? And we'll see how he finds his wife, and we'll see what attitude she's in, and we'll see some problems they encounter. Will the marriage go on forever? Will they live happily forever after? Or will it end in disaster? Next week, tune in. We'll see. Next week, 7 o'clock, Wednesday. Thanks for coming.